ourselves in this endless quest for excitement and sensation.
Another massive effect on your life, which we needn't talk about but just record, is that your wife died very suddenly, leaving you with 3 children to bring up, which you did. That must have had a tremendous effect on your life.
Yes, it did. I mean, it absolutely shattered me. I think it probably changed everything about me, to be honest. I think I was never the same person again. My wife was 34 when she died of pneumonia while we were on holiday in Spain, leaving these 3 small children. I felt, that nature had committed a terrible crime against this young woman. It took me a long while to accommodate that into some sort of, I started writing a series of strange short fictions that were collected as the Atrocity Exhibition.
It was very unusual at the time for someone to publish a book containing 2 short stories, one called The Facelift of Princess Margaret and the other called Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan. That would be unusual at any time, perhaps.
The central character is a psychiatrist who's having a mental breakdown. He's obsessed with the amount of cruelty and pure sensation for its own sake that floods the world, floods TV screens and films and so on. He sets out on a sort of strange little odyssey of his own in which he restages some of the most terrible events of his time, the Kennedy assassination, for example.
Oswald was the starter. From his window above the track, he opened the race by firing the starting gun. It is believed that the first shot was not properly heard by all the drivers. In the following confusion, Oswald fired the gun 2 more times, but the race was already underway. Kennedy got off to a bad start. There was a governor in his car, and its speed remained constant at about 15 miles an hour. However, shortly afterwards, when the governor had been put out of action, the car accelerated rapidly and continued at high speed along the remainder of the course.
I think it was all an attempt to make 2 and 2 make 5. And if 2 and 2 could make 5, then somehow my wife's death could be explained. It couldn't. I'd seen enough during my childhood to know death comes without any sort of calling card, just comes suddenly. And it's probably meaningless. But it takes a long time to learn that.
Can you tell us about the form of that book?
You could call it experimental, but some people might say that all it proves is that the experiment hasn't worked. The problem is that people tackle the book as if it was a conventional sort of linear narrative running page 1 onwards, and it isn't. I wanted something that reflected the texture of everyday life in the 60s. There was this sense that we were living entirely in a media landscape. It was very difficult to tell what was real and what was false. And I wanted to convey something of the feeling of what it was like to be bombarded from all sides. And particularly if you were having a nervous breakdown, you might well see the world as it's shown in the Atrocity Exhibition. The thing to do is don't start reading page 1 and start at random, anywhere. If you find a paragraph that intrigues you, read it. It'll probably set up resonances in your mind. Move on and look at the adjacent paragraphs. Soon, it'll begin to assemble a portrait of something probably close to everyday reality.
Crash made its appearance in the Atrocity Exhibition. 3 years later, you wrote what still could be thought of as your most controversial novel, Crash. And I can't resist quoting one publisher's reader who said, "This author is beyond psychiatric help, do not publish." Well, it was published, and it's republished and republished and republished. Can you tell us what you were doing in that, and the way that the technology and the idea of the eroticism of the car crash drove through the book in a way that disturbed people? Do not publish, said this chap.
I took that, by the way, as a huge compliment. Because this publisher's reader was herself the wife of a psychiatrist. And I thought, total artistic success. I think I was obsessed then with the sort of the taste for cruelty and sensation that we saw, particularly in the cinema. Feature films were unbelievably violent then, and at the centre of most feature films was the car chase, and like a sort of evil flower emerging out of the sort of screaming streets came this, the crashing cars. And no one seemed in the least put off by the car crash.
Ram the bucket!
It's obvious that the car crash has powerful resonances that, particularly if they involve the death of the famous, that plane crashes or hotel fires or train crashes don't have.
Why do you think that is?
What is it about the car?
Yes.
Well, I think it's that, of course, we all drive, most of us drive cars. Most of us are aware that if we give in to feelings of aggression, we may kill ourselves. There's a sort of erotic fascination that death has for us when we imagine it. I mean, the connections between sex, eroticism, and death have been explored, for hundreds of years, if not thousands. But it seemed to me that what had once been a sort of morbid playground of a small group of French intellectuals was the standard fare chosen by mass audiences who were going to the movies for the evening. They quite liked it, watching people entangled in car crashes. So I thought there's probably, there's some sort of connection that needs to be explored.
Vaughan unfolded for me all his obsessions with the mysterious eroticism of wounds, the perverse logic of blood-soaked instrument panels, seatbelts smeared with excrement, sun visors lined with brain tissue. For Vaughan, each crashed car set off a tremor of excitement, in the complex geometries of a dented fender, in the unexpected variations of crushed radiator grills, in the grotesque overhang of an instrument panel forced onto a driver's crotch as if in some calibrated act of machine fellatio.
I wrote sarcastically about crash as a defense because I didn't get it, and it alarmed me, and everyone did too. I mean, everyone wore a different costume to the ball. I wore sarcasm, a lot of people wore moral outrage, etc. I didn't get it.
I wanted people to be shocked and disgusted. I wanted to unsettle the reader. I wanted to expose the perverse side of the reader's mind. I wanted to provoke the reader into facing the possibility that people are excited by violence.
The interesting thing is that 23 years later, when David Cronenberg turned into a film, it was equally controversial. Alexander Walker, then the movie critic of the Evening Standard, said, "A movie beyond the bounds of depravity," and it was banned by Westminster City Council.
Still is.
So you'd hit something that the nerve hadn't been anaesthetized, had it?
I went to Cannes when it was shown there, taking the line that this film was a sort of deeply moral statement. At this point, Walker stood up and stormed out. But I noticed that The French and Italians, Spaniards who were there, all completely understood what crash